Hi, everybody, and welcome to another session through LinkedIn Live of the Lean Forum. Today, we're extremely lucky to have Chris Butterworth with us to talk to some of his latest book, Leading Excellence, and we will get to ask a few questions. As usual, I'll interact with Chris, and we'll see where we go with a few stories. So far, we've had some great conversations. No pressure, Chris. And Chris is over in Perth, and it's currently sunny. So let's, without further ado, hand over to Chris.
Thanks, Richard. It's great to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. We're going to have a chat about a book that came out in September last year called Leading Excellence, which I co-wrote with Stephen Dargan and Brad Jevons. And it's really very much a practical guide to leadership. Thank you, Richard.
No problem.
It has achieved #1 bestseller in the business books in Australia. It's
done extremely well.
Translated into Polish and It's currently being translated into Polish and Mandarin, and we've got an audiobook coming out in March. So yeah, it's been very well received, and it's very much based on our learnings as a group of leaders over many years about what we think is needed for not just for existing leaders, but for aspiring leaders as well, to help people to understand what it means to be a leader. Because time and time again, we see people being appointed into leadership roles with a tap on the shoulder and said, "That's it, you're now a leader, get on with it." And they might have spent 10 years learning technical skills, and suddenly our best technicians become our worst leaders because we just
the hospital pass approach.
The hospital pass. So this intention of this book, in fact, one of the reviewers of the book said it's you shouldn't call it a book, you should call it a handbook for leaders, and that was the intention. So the basic premise of the book is that all of us are essentially first and foremost feeling beings. And what that means is that in any given situation, our initial response is emotional.
Yep.
We react in an emotional manner when people say something to us, when we see things. Now, what we have to do is to think how we engage our intellectual side of our brain to make sure what we're saying is actually is useful and the impact of it. And you can really just reflect on this for a moment and think about it from your own point of view. Have you ever said something and then a few moments later said, "Oh dear, that wasn't the right thing to say"? Well,
sadly, too many times, Chris.
Absolutely. I still do it even now, and it's just because it takes a lot of practice. Or equally with an email. You sent an email and it's gone. You go, "Oh no, what have I done?"
Yeah.
And that's just the way we're wired. So we are emotional beings that have the ability to think. The problem is that we need a mechanism that helps us to think first before we respond. And so what we start with in the book is talking about, you need to be able to, if you want to be a good leader, you first of all got to understand yourself. So understand what that means in terms of thinking before we speak or act, but also understand what does this mean in terms of my personal purpose and what I value. And there's a couple of really simple exercises that we go through in the book about how to help you understand your purpose and value, because that grounds you then in how you want to behave as a leader. Are you a leader to serve others, or are you a leader to serve yourself? It's important to reflect on that. So, what kind of leader do I want to be? But whilst that is the essential groundwork or foundations, we realize that's not enough on its own. We need to build habits. We just both said then that we still fall into responding without thinking because that's the way that we're wired. And so what can we do to help us to pause, think about the context, and then respond in the appropriate way? So what we came up with was the idea of 5 hats. And these are based on our experiences of behaviors that leaders need to demonstrate, which really embed a culture of continuous improvement and create thriving individuals and thriving organizations. So the idea is we've got to think about the context of the situation we're in and think about which is the appropriate hat that I need to wear in this context. And it often might be more than one, but pause is a key thing. Pause, respond. And as you do that, you start building a habit. We've got lots of exercises in the book to help you to build habits, but the more often it's like anything else, the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. So we landed on 5 hats, and I thought it would be quite useful for us to have a brief discussion today about the headlines of those 5 hats.
Yeah, great.
They're important. So they're not really in any. Some people say, "Well, what's the right sequence for the hat?" And there isn't a right sequence. Again, it goes back to context.
Yep.
What is required in this conversation in this context? But I'll walk through them randomly, if you like. One of the things that we've realized from not just in this book, but in lots of publications, is the importance of people connecting to purpose. So what's the organization's purpose, and how do I contribute to that? And how does my personal purpose connect to the organization's purpose?
Yeah.
And that's time and it's critical for engagement. So the big opportunity that we talk about in the book is that only 23% on average of the people worldwide are engaged at work. So
which is amazing, really.
I flip it the other way and say, actually, it's, if we look at it the other way, that's more than 75% potential opportunity for improvement. I thought we invade half of those opportunities, it'd be amazing. So the first hat that I'll talk about is inspire. And the key thing with the inspire hat is what we are doing is inspiring people to connect to their purpose, to the organizational purpose. Time and again, you'll know this from your experience, Richard, we assume that we've told people what we're trying to achieve and that they just get it. Because no one gets it if all we do is tell them. So inspire is about thinking about what are the conversations I need? How do I make it personal to individuals? How do I inspire them to strive for improvement, to make tomorrow better than today, every day, but to see that that's also good for them, good for the organization, and good for the wider community. So you'll know in our work that we do with Shingo, we talk a lot about ideal behaviors. So what does that mean? When you think about ideal behaviors, it's got to be good for the people, good for the person, good for the organization, good for the shareholders, good for the community, good for the planet. So in all those different aspects of what does ideal mean, you can explore those when you're thinking about, well, what do I need to talk about to inspire this particular individual?
It's a very good point, and certainly within Inspire, when we're looking at trying to connect people with purpose and goals, it's a useful conversation to trigger, and the questions that you ask are really important. Not that they're answered, but that you ask those questions to stimulate someone to think about things more broadly. And often business purpose is not necessarily super exciting or inspirational enough that you can constantly think about it and that's all you need. It's more, what's your experience that allows you to connect more strongly? And once you've got that, that's then the purpose. It's the one that resonates with you, that connects to the purpose. So it's a good point.
Absolutely. And I've come to the conclusion that actually, if you really want to inspire people, you have to ask. You can't do that through telling them.
No.
You have to ask. You have to inspire by asking questions.
And people will come with that, won't they, Chris? And they will experience something at some point because that question's been asked.
Yep.
And they will connect. I remember an example in pharmaceutical industry where an employee was talking about just that. And they said they just didn't ever really get the company overall purpose / message until they visited their own parents' home. And they were looking at all the tablets and things in their pill tray. And they realized that they manufactured nearly 70-80% of those pills that his parents actually took.
Yep.
So now he was keeping his parents alive. As simple
Great
as that.
example.
Mm.
Yeah, very good, very good. So that's a high level view of inspire. Another hat would be teach. Now, teach is not necessarily just classroom teaching, although I think that is also very important for leaders to be able to do that. I remember many, many years ago visiting an organization that was incredible in the continuous improvement culture, and the vice presidents would teach the continuous improvement module to new starters.
Very good.
That kind of sent a very powerful message about how important it was. And what we've noticed is that teaching has often been increasingly removed from leaders and given to someone else, to the training department to run. So there's no ownership. And actually, in the more mature continuous improvement cultures, leaders do a lot of teaching. And under the teaching hat, I'm also putting mentoring.
Yeah.
And I'll come on to the difference when I talk about the next hat. But mentoring is not the same as coaching. Coaching is a different hat. And the way I think about it is mentoring is actually giving advice and giving technical input. Yeah? So you're actually giving people answers that they need. You need to do that sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the teach hat is actually sharing knowledge, mentoring, and transferring knowledge to team members and to peers. So, and I think the other key reason it's a powerful hat to wear is that every time you teach something, you learn. You learn from the people that you're teaching. You learn what works. You learn why perhaps they haven't understood it because you've explained it in a certain way and it hasn't landed. So that means what have I got to learn how I do it differently? So I think what's often missed is teaching is an incredibly powerful thing to do, to learn for yourself.
Agreed. I think one of the things I remember hearing from Shingo Prize-winning organization CEO was the fact that he deliberately went out of his way to make sure he reinforced the purpose and the principles the organization run to through the things that people were learning and developing in, and how that enhanced and enabled the business to reach its purpose. Now, he said it was just sort of simple everyday lessons and simple everyday conversations that stimulated that. And it was a little bit like Inspire, but it was actually more teach, a little bit more along those mentorship and experience-based lines. So yeah, I get that.
Yeah, very much so. And all these things are, not one-off activities or something. This is the job, is what I should be doing in all the conversations I'm having. So that leads me on to a third hat, which is coaching. And I think, again, this is very misunderstood. And at the very high level way I like to think about it is coaching is asking questions, mentoring is giving advice. And it's not that one's wrong or one's right, but it is that we need to understand which one is appropriate and when to use which one.
Absolutely.
And most leaders, or many leaders, I should say they are coaching when they're actually mentoring. And people say, well, so what? Well, so what is what we're doing is if we overuse the mentoring and don't coach, we build dependency upon ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
People stop thinking for themselves. They keep coming to us for the answers all the time. And before we know it, we're some leaders in the past will say, well, I'm here till 7 o'clock every night, and my people are going home at 5. So, well, think about why that is.
Yeah. It's a fabulous trap to fall into, that coaching is seen as providing the answers. And it's, as you say, it's about enhancing a couple of things, certainly around helping to enhance people's skills, but around that thinking bit, helping them to think, and sometimes learning to think differently is really at the core of coaching. And as soon as you go down a very highly technical front, that's one thing. But the alternate is to enhance thinking. I love those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really nice way to think about it. You're getting people to think for themselves.
Yeah,
You're not
absolutely.
abdicating. So, people sometimes misunderstand this, and they'll say, "Oh, well, I refuse to give them the answer. I just tell them to go away and think about it." Well, that's not actually coaching. That's not coaching, guys. No, that's abdication of responsibility. So what I really need to think about, what's the right kind of conversation? What questions do I need to ask? And key tip is, don't chase the solution. Sometimes things are urgent and they need an answer now. And that might, then you, fine, go into mentoring, but most things don't. And you can actually, so if you avoid chasing the solution, instead agree a next step that will move you towards a solution, that's the best way to get into the coaching mindset.
And I think you elaborate on that in the book quite nicely, in terms of how to think about it and how to get yourself in the right frame of mind and how to approach those conversations. But the really important one is to make sure that you slow down.
Yeah.
Because if you are in a hurry, as you say, it just completely stops you from entering that mindful space where you're engaging your whole brain. You just start to use your reptilian brain and various other fight and flight reactionary responses, and you're not really thinking. So I get that.
Yeah. And and you can't change overnight in these things, but you can do a plan. So one of the chapters in the book, we talk about, well, how do I allocate my time now? And there's little exercises to say, well, how am I really? I was quite provocative. How am I really busy doing the wrong things? Because I know I used to do that, and I'm still seeing lots of leaders doing that now. So let's put some structure to it. And what do I mean by the right things? Because we see in the single prize winning organizations that typically leaders are spending 70% of their time on culture and behaviors. And when I say that to people who are not at that level, they look at me aghast and say, well, okay, what do I do then? And that was a really good challenge that I had, and so that was why I go into that more detail in the book, because what I came to realize, having several conversations with different leaders along those lines, is, well, it's not necessarily about having to do lots of completely different things. There are some different things you've got to do, but a lot of it is about doing what you do now in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah? So you might already be going to the shop floor. You might already think you're doing Gemba, but what are you doing when you're there? Are you coaching?
Yeah, exactly.
Or are you telling people the answers? Right. Okay. So there's that change, and there's some simple things we talk about around that, like we'll take a typical leadership meeting and look at how long you're spending on people and culture in your agenda in your leadership meeting. And how can you increase that? It's very and that will provide you with some really great insights in how to spend time practicing the hats, what you need to focus on.
Well, I think, and to that same point, I was having a conversation recently about how simply you can structure meetings so that people can get in a different mindset. So a simple version of that, sort of today's agenda for the business meeting, and then tomorrow's agenda. And I'm not suggesting it's half day, but certainly distinctly separate, so that people now know they need to switch into a different mode, because otherwise people stay in that reactive firefight today mode, even when they're talking about tomorrow. It's, here's the action plan. Right, we've done tomorrow. Okay, quick now. What's the crisis?
Because that's how the operational managers' minds work often, and that's what we've got to do. So actually, really, build on your point there. What I've seen a few people do work really well is actually turn around now and say 2 meetings.
Yeah.
Doesn't take any more time, but I'm going to put a day between them, and the focus of this one is not the day today; it's tomorrow. So that's a useful thing to think about.
Very good.
And that leads me actually onto the 4th hat, which is the direct hat. Because it's not a hat that, yes, okay. Well, it's not a hat that we should overuse, but more of a problem, to be honest, is that it's not used when it needs to be.
Yeah.
So occasionally you get very dictatorial leaders who use that hat, overuse the direct hat. But it's equally an issue if people don't use it when it's required.
Yeah.
And so, for example, when I ask people, when do you think you should use the direct hat? always get an answer back. Oh, well, safety issue should always be really directive around safety, which
Sure,
is
high
it's
urgency.
correct. Absolutely, without that. But actually, what's equally important, in my view, is behaviors. So the direct hat needs to come into play when we see behaviors that are not to the ideal standard that we're expecting.
Yeah.
And actually point that out and say, look, that's just not acceptable to behave that way here. We've agreed we won't behave that way. No ifs and buts, we then might move into a coaching conversation afterward as a second hat straight. But first and foremost is to make that really clear that it's not negotiable.
And that's crucial. And it does then lead to, so what behaviors should we be holding people to account to? Because actually, until you've actually described that and established that, you've got nothing to hold people to account to. And that's where it becomes inconsistent. It's not fair. You're picking on me, blah, blah, blah. So you need to establish those behaviors in the first place. And that's where most businesses, they don't have that. They just talk in round terms. We're going to be respectful. It's like, yeah, well, what does that mean exactly? Give me some, give me some examples of what that means and doesn't mean. So yeah, it's a good conversation.
So the most powerful way of doing it I've seen work now is where you actually start off with those value statements or principles, like respect every individual, and then you actually ask the teams to define the key behaviors for them as a team that they will work together to demonstrate those things.
Exactly.
Because you might end up with variations in each team, which I don't have an issue with, because the way that the forklift truck drivers need to demonstrate respect might be completely different than the people in finance. So rather than a generic statement that is kind of something that is a bit meaningless for everyone, make it really specific.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the key power behind that is what that also then means is you do not need the leader to do all the management of behaviors, because leaders can't be everywhere all the time. This will only work if you make peers accountable to each other for agreed behaviors.
Yeah.
So these that whole thing around direct, what we can coach people that they can direct their colleagues.
Yeah.
When they see things that are not acceptable. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Just to be that. So direct's really important and used.
I think leaders often assume that they're front and center and it's just them.
Yes.
And that's a mistake as well. And as you say, the peers holding each other to account, that's where you want to get to, where the leader only needs to be very visible and present occasionally in advocating and reinforcing the importance of. They don't need to be with the stick. No. That's where it goes wrong.
And giving recognition when people do that. So recognition is critical to embedding behaviors. And we talk about systems driving behaviors, but in my view, recognition is critical to embedding the behaviors, even with the systems in place. So under all of the hats, and very much under the last hat, which is the support hat, is the whole concept of recognition. Because
absolutely,
we recognize people who effectively manage behaviors. Okay, great, we recognize not what people have achieved, but behaviors they've demonstrated to achieve it.
Yeah, exactly.
And if we don't do that, if we make behavior management of behaviors only the responsibility of leaders, what will happen is anything that's not required behavior gets escalated up as an issue for the leader to solve.
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm back to what I was before, trying to fix everyone else's issues, but I'm now fixing everyone else's behavioural issues.
And sadly, what that'll translate into, I've just proved myself right. This is a load of rubbish anyway, and I might as well put it place. But I'm going to quote you actually from quite a few years ago now, where you talked a particular phrase called "catching people in the right." And that really demonstrates very clearly for me, and I've used it many times since, so no apologies. It demonstrates very clearly that we're looking to advocate the good behaviors, so reinforcing and rewarding, as you said, the good behaviors, not trying to catch people out when they do bad things, but trying to support and advocate and reward the good behaviors. And a few businesses I know fall foul of not necessarily advocating that strongly enough. and they fall into the trap of rewarding good results. So basically, they fall into this rewarding the fish for swimming thing, which everybody knows. They just get tired of it and it becomes somebody's turn. Whereas if you reward the way in which we went about doing work, that's the behavioral bit. And that's the bit that everybody can latch to. So I like the analogies, Chris.
Very good. Yeah, no, that's a good way to think about it. So support's the fifth hat, and support is, that recognition is part of support, but also support is about knowing our people. And in the previous book, Why Care, we talked about how critical psychological well-being is, and to do that, leaders need to understand the individual. Every individual has a maximum amount of available capacity in their brain. Everyone's different, but if people are stressed, they've got less and less capacity available to work on improvement. And part of support is about recognizing when people are in those situations and what do I need to do to help them, because I'm not going to get the best out of them if I ignore it. If I get very bad, very, very bad if I ignore it. So support is about looking out for people, looking out for yourself as well, actually, and making sure that you're not in a bad place. And so we're supporting with recognition, we're supporting with, in the Why Care book, we talk about thriving plans for individuals, to make sure that.
So I think you're still there, Chris. I think it just disconnected briefly. Keep going.
What people need in order to do a great job. And just, linked into that, picking up on your point of catching people in the right, I think there's a big opportunity to think about the way that we measure performance and the things that we measure. And also in the way that we describe behaviors. Sometimes we need to say, these are the things that you're not to do to help people to hold each other to accountable. And I always remember many, many years ago going into a site with a big sign on the wall saying, no spitting here. And you think, okay, well, there's a long way to go. that was in the canteen.
My goodness.
But there's some basic standards you have to get. But better is to think about what are the positives. So, for example, real simple example, organizations tend to measure absenteeism. Well, absenteeism is a very negative thing to measure. Most people respond better to a positive thing they can strive for rather than something negative they're being beat up from. So just flip it round and measure attendance rather than absenteeism. Because then instead of the team going, we've got 6% absence, we need to get it down to 5%. They say, actually, we've got 94% attendance. How can we get that up to 95%? And it's just a different mindset. So one of the opportunities is to look at all the things we're measuring, particularly on key behavioral indicators as well, and say, well, what's the positive thing that we can encourage people to strive for something rather than beat them up about something?
And you're absolutely right. And it completely changes the activity in your brain when you frame something in the positive, because it's something that is not to be feared. Anything in the negative is to be feared, and your brain literally shuts down. And so, lots of examples.
It gets defensive. When it's negative, automatically you become defensive. Because you're protecting yourself. So a key aspect of that kind of support aspect is to think about, well, how do we focus on the positive?
Very good. Very good. So that's a nice run through of the hats there, and we're coming up to about half an hour in now, and I just want to ask you, in your experience, not necessarily just of the hats and the model you've pulled together now, what tend to be the conversations that you have with senior leaders that you have that aha moment? What are those sorts of things that you've picked up through writing the book and through your experience tend to be the things that most leaders take away as new thoughts and things to work on?
I think the key thing is about how they spend their time. What do they spend it on?
Right.
And getting that people to reflect on, well, I, as a senior leader, because many senior leaders might have been promoted up through the ranks, so no one's ever sat there and said, okay, well, your job profile, you've got that list of things you've got to do, but what does that really mean in terms of how you should spend your time, right? So, because they've still got the technical expertise, so all I do now is I might only carry on teaching people the technical expertise. So I think a big aha moment comes when you sit and say, okay, well, let's talk about people and culture. Yeah. What do you see your role as in people and culture? And to be honest, many people go, well, it's important, but I'm not sure about exactly what they have to do. So then when you can help people to see, well, what does that mean for them? How could you change what you do now so that you're actually enabling great people in a great organization rather than trying to do it all yourself?
Yeah.
Then you get a big ha-ha from many people.
And I think that's where the connection with the hats is quite interesting, because instead of just using them in the moment or deciding how you're going to approach something in the moment, it actually gives you the opportunity to think ahead of time. How am I intentionally going to head into this conversation? What's my primary objective here? And what do I want to achieve at the end of this interaction? What would be the best use of my time here? And that then calls to the same things. Am I going to be supportive? Am I going to be coaching, inspiring, teaching? Or am I going to need to lean on the directive element here? And that's a useful way to think about not only what's my leader standard work going to look like, but how do I approach that in the best way?
How am I going to do it? You know, and if you're going to go and do a one-on-one, which are often planned in advance.
Yes.
Right? What's my plan for that? Which hats do I think I'm going to have to use in this conversation?
Exactly. I like that. I think most leaders struggle with the idea that they have to drop doing certain things that they've always done as they've ascended through the ranks. Most leaders hang on to the things they were technically brilliant at. And in the absence of high competence in the new thing they're supposed to be doing, accidentally lean on the amazing thing they used to do to try and continue to prove worth. And that's a trap that certainly leaders fall into. The whole structure of conversations can be built around the hats and the ideas that are within there to add value. So the idea of a leader is to add value and help provide guidance and help provide inspiration for the people that they're leading and are in service of. And I really like the language that you use in the book that talks to that.
Very much. I serve. Who do I serve? I serve my people so that they can serve the customer ultimately.
Okay, so I've liked that conversation in terms of delving into the hats, because it's easy to just think of it as a sort of a single paragraph. And I understand what the Inspire hat is. It's to inspire. And I get what support is. I'm going to help someone to do something, and I get the idea of coaching because I'm just going to tell them the technical thing they don't get. So I think if people take the time to read through the book and look a little bit broader, then you'll see that the context is quite significant in their environment, and that they can learn a lot by just being open to the idea that there's more I can do and there's more I can plan for as a leader. One of the interesting things you mentioned there was actually about this quoting back of how things will be for people in the end. So, for example, when you're in this mature state, you will be coaching and teaching 70, 80% of your time. And that is very scary to leaders who are barely managing an hour every month because they're so busy. So it often blows them away. And conversely, I always remember asking a question of a very mature organization and said, why is it that you do so much coaching and leading as a very senior leader, as a CEO or as a GM? Why do you do that? And there was a very long pause, and I was expecting this moment of inspiration. And the leader just came back and said, because it works. Okay, I get it. You have to go on the journey to realize how it works, and then you will never let go of it. There are many examples of that through Why Care as well. And this book in terms of what's important to people and what will they hold on to no matter what.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's scary for people if they're doing 10% of the time now, and you say you should be, let's just look how we get to 60 or 70. So that's why in the one of the chapters in the book we actually say do it incrementally. Do a plan one might be whatever it is now. How do you get it 20% improvement on it or 10% improvement on it? You know, you can't go overnight from one to the other. It takes
No.
it's going to take a while. So, because part of that journey will be about how you're developing your direct reports so that they can do some of the stuff you're doing now. So,
yeah, exactly.
Which, nevertheless, it's a goal that you can get, and we put milestones against it.
Exactly. The slowly but surely. You don't get to the amazing place immediately. You have to do it in stages, and that helps keep the momentum going once you've started that journey. Otherwise, it's always overwhelming. It's a bit like my campaign on losing weight. If I targeted 78 kilos and was only satisfied when I hit that, I would have stopped dieting long ago. As it is, while I'm a long way away from that, I'm still going.
I think nothing left if you lose 78 kilos, mate.
I'm just breathing in, and that's very kind of you to say so. Lots of careful breathing practice to look this good. So thank you very much for that energizing conversation, Chris. Just any last thoughts or any last inspirational thought bubbles to leave people with until we get you back again, because you don't get away that easily.
I think as leaders, we should recognize that all our people and ourselves deserve a great place to work. What are we doing every day to help make it a great place to work?
Fantastic. I think you're absolutely on it there, and I think we'll probably wrap up there, Chris. So look, thanks very much for your time. I always very much appreciated your leadership when you were leading me back in the days when I was first starting out. So thank you very much again for that. And thanks for your thoughts on the book. I know it's often difficult to talk about your own work, but when so many people are interested and so many people have got the opportunity to step up and use some of the practices that you've got in the book, then it was too good an opportunity to miss. So thank you very much for your time, and look forward to seeing you for a beer soon.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Chris.